Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Graham. This is My Business, Your World. Today our guest is Mr. Rick Maher. Did I say
Rick
that
Maher,
right?
yep.
Rick Maher. I'll get it. Rick is the CEO and founder of Effective Human Resources company, and Effective HR is a fractional HR human resource consulting firm. They focus on the helping clients or business owners on three areas: compliance issues, employee challenges, and policies and procedure headaches. Rick has been in this field of HR, employee issues, for about 18 years, and for 7 of those years he spent as Vice President for Employee Benefits for USI. There he's dealt with a number of different issues and focused on the largest employee benefits issues and built Effective HR on that. Mr. Maher, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about what is fractional HR. Let's start with that, and then I'll just probably ask you to give me a little bit about your background.
Fractional HR, the concept came about when we looked at the typical first or second generation family business. They typically have somewhere between 10 and 200 employees, and they're doing somewhere between $1 million in revenue and $20 million in revenue. Well, those companies are big enough that they have HR problems, as you described, compliance issues, employee issues, and policies and procedures, but they're not big enough that they need a full-time HR person. So what we came up with was the fractional concept. So fractional meaning it could be to come on site to do a project, or it could mean that, and this is the more typical model, where we're on site 1 or 2 days a week operating as their HR department and handling all those things for the business owner. So that fractional model, that fractional term, we felt really captured what we were providing to the employers, and from a marketing perspective, it helps describe what we do so people get it almost immediately when they think about us.
Right, and it's a fraction of the cost, obviously. I myself have functioned or gone in interim positions, so you're going in to help alleviate or help them to get to that next step, and that's all a part of getting their operations in order to make it very efficient and effective so they can make more money.
That's right. We have, kind of a saying that it's the right resource at the right time at the right price, and that's what the flexibility of fractional gives an employer.
Now, let's talk about a little bit in the sense of some companies are still not using or not using the services that they need to or that are out there. Talk a little bit about your positioning. I know you work with over 200 companies, employers here on Long Island. What makes some of these smaller, the 1 million to 20 or even a little lower, not take advantage of services?
So the typical that company, let's just describe who they are a little bit, and that might be a good jumping off point. When people start their business, it's them, their spouse, and they're in their garage and they're in their basement, and they're worried about figuring out what their niche is in the marketplace, and going out and getting clients and servicing them and essentially keeping the lights on. And they get really good at doing what it is that they do. And all of the other things, the operational side of the business, aren't important at that stage of the business. Then as they grow a little bit, the next couple of people they hire are their best friend from high school, their cousin, and those sorts of things. And again, they're not focused at that stage on the operational side of the business. They're purely focused on what's our niche and how do we gain traction in it. And then there comes this magic day, and to give it an employee count, call it 8 to 12 employees, where now they're really hiring their first set of employees who are not related to them in some manner. And at that point, operational things become truly important. How your books are set up, all kinds of things that are operational. And at that point, the business owner looks up and says, okay, I made it here. The lights are staying on. Now I got to think about all of these other things, HR and et cetera, HR being one of them. And so that business owner looks at his profit and loss statement each month and says, okay, I got to make some decisions here. And some decide that HR might not be the right way to spend their money. Others, and it's becoming more and more of them because of the complexities with compliance
Right.
and dealing with the employees and those sorts of issues, they've come to realize that it's time. I got in business to sell and make widgets. I didn't get in business to deal with why Sally and Johnny can't get along or get to work on time. And so there are a whole host of folks that are seeing that point where I need some HR help. It's now time. Now that smaller company has different needs than the bigger companies, of course. But the compliance world and what's happening and what the outside forces pressing on a business owner are, the HR side's becoming more and more important. Now, your question was, why are some not using it? Well, I think it comes down to, in those smaller businesses, it's purely looking at their cash on hand, their capital, and where do we best need to deploy it to keep the business open. But when they get to that next level, that's tend when they start to look and say, HR is now the time.
What I find is I've worked with a couple of small businesses. I've worked with the mid-sized and large organization, is that HR does get pushed back a lot. But it's one of the core and most critical areas that you need to, doesn't matter if it's just you and your wife, that you really kind of have to hone in on how you're running and what are some of the compliance issues or challenges. Now we're talking about with the Obamacare and so on and so forth. There are a lot of things that are going on that you need to be compliant with. And compliant, no matter what size organization you're running, is a huge risk. It can mean closing your door. And it's even in the beginning, it may not be something that you're going into, but I guess depending on the services, if you're going to be providing services, it may be something that you need to look at because you're talking also, it relates to your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if you think about it, when we talk to most business owners, and the first question I ask them is, what's the biggest asset of your business? And they all immediately say, "Oh, our people are the best," right? It's a natural reaction, and that's a great answer. It's a wonderful answer. It's probably the best answer. But there's a follow-up question that I have for every person that answers that question to tell me if they truly mean it or they don't. And that is, if they do not have a director of HR, who are the employees reporting to? And if the employers are not reporting directly to a director of HR type person, and that director of HR is not reporting directly to the CEO, then I know that business owner doesn't truly value their employees. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what happens is the employees or the director of HR reports to the CFO. Doesn't make sense. If that's your biggest asset, why wouldn't you have it reporting directly to the business owner? So in the traditional world of when I started in business, when I started working, HR was the person that made sure that the company picnic went off without a hitch. And that position did tend to get pushed to the side. HR has evolved to more of a compliance and a policy and procedure-based position that ultimately frees up the business owner from the day-to-day employee stuff to go out and build their business. So in that sense, our model is focused directly on the business owner, because if it's not important enough to the business owner, then it's not important enough to have.
All right. Let's talk about, since you kind of just touched on it, tell me a little bit about your background, when you started, how you started in terms of HR, why HR, and a little bit about, let's go to then, some of the struggles or how you made it to where you are today, to having at least 200 clients here on Long Island.
So my background, I got out of college and I knew, looking at my personality, that I was a salesperson. So the natural things for a person like me were sell insurance, sell cellular service, sell office equipment. And I wanted to get married. So the insurance business was paying $500 more a year. So I said, that's what I'm going to do at 23 years old. And, through those years, I had a lot of success, really enjoyed the sales process, and was a student of sales. It wasn't necessarily about the product, it was about the process of the sale that most intrigued me. And So through the years, insurance or benefits, naturally, we were always talking to HR folks. That's who our client base was. So I got to have a great appreciation for what it is that they do and how important they are to an organization. And then about 2007, 2008, I had this entrepreneurial itch, which some days I kick myself for having that entrepreneurial itch, and some days I'm very happy that I had it. But I had this itch that I was going to go and start my own little insurance business. I was the smartest guy in the room, and I was going to do it on my own. So I struck out on my own and had a bunch of friends who owned small businesses who became clients of mine. And, I would talk to them, and they'd say, Rick, there's a million insurance brokers out there. What, as your buddy, you need to have something that differentiates your business. So it took a while of kicking around and talking to them, and this is kind of putting together many conversations. But finally I said to them, guys, what problems do you have that no one's solving for you? Mm-hmm. And their simple answer was HR stuff. Wow. So these were the companies that had 10, 12, 15, 25 employees. So it got me thinking. I knew a lot of HR people. I worked with them all these years, and I looked at the small business market that we described, of which there's between 124,000 and 158,000 of those businesses on Long Island, and I said there's got to be a way. But the real catalyst was two things. One, when I would talk about insurance and say, hey, I also have this HR consulting piece, yeah, they'd glaze over at the insurance and sit forward when we talked about the HR consulting. So that was one thing where I said, let me flip the model completely to HR. But the other thing was the market crash of 2008. And all of the great HR people, or many of the great HR people, they were either the first ones laid off, yeah, or the last ones laid off. Mm-hmm. Thanks for coming, fire everybody, close the lights and lock the door when you're done. Nice seeing you. Mm-hmm. So there was this opportunity for this tremendous talent pool that was just sitting idly by. And I said, if I can take the problems that those small business owners are having that no one's solving, and this tremendous HR talent pool, bring them together, put a sales and marketing strategy around that, and then on top of it, a process and procedure for service around that, I may have something. And that was how it started. And that was in about 2009. And I've been kicked in the pants quite a bit, but each time you get kicked in the pants, you learn something new and you move on to ultimately where we got today, where we're really growing, and it's about process, service, and sales.
Now, it's very interesting taking on viability or issues or challenges that are going on the landscape. It took you, I would say, a shorter period of time to kind of see where it is you had to really go back to the drawing board, mm-hmm, and then look at what is possible within a 2-year mm-hmm period, because typically it takes at least 5 years for most businesses, depending on what it is. Maybe a third year you're trying to break even and paying down some loans and so on and so forth before you got there. What were some of the things or individuals that helped you? I know you were talking a little bit about having conversation with other individuals in your circles and seeing and having those other conversations, or seeing what is, and actually picking up. I think it's so key from a sales background. It's kind of, you were really listening and observing what that sales pitch would be, or what would make the difference, or what would make that sale.
So there are 3 key things that help me kind of morph relatively quickly. The first was, I'm not an expert in anything. I wasn't an expert in insurance, and I'm not an expert in HR, but I'm an expert in the sales process. So I looked at that and that listening and that ability to change what I was doing. In my business, I have the experts dealing with the clients, and that allows me to think about the bigger picture and make changes where we need to make changes. I'm not in the weeds. I'm working on the business, not in the business. The second thing is, I got some of the best advisors I can find really before I even started my business. I went and got a business coach, and I belong to a group called the Alternative Board. So that's where I get my coaching. That's where I get my support system, all those sorts of things. And I spent money on a coach very early on when most business owners in that small phase are saying,
Holding
I got to keep it all. But the analogy that I use is, Derek Jeter, on the last day that he retired from baseball as one of the greatest baseball players ever, he still had several different coaches. So even if you're the best and at the top of your game, or you're just starting out, having a coach to me is a very important component to what helped me understand what I don't know and how to change my business to look at it. And the third thing is a book. And the book is called Blue Ocean Strategies. And it's a book about creating new space in the business world and finding a niche that allows you the room to operate under the radar, to test your model, to try things, to fail. That was a very inspirational book to me because I truly live by it. It sits on my nightstand to this day, and I refer to it quite often. But I think the ability to not be afraid to fail, because you do it quite often, but when you're starting a business, is essential. And I looked at every failure as an opportunity to say, what did I learn from it? And if I learned from it and took something from it, then it wasn't a failure.
All right. Let's go into our first break. We're going to come back because those are the exciting things that small business owners, or not just small businesses in general and their senior executive, go through day in, day out. So let's take our first break. Thank you again for joining us today. Again, this is My Business, Your World. I'm Dr. Graham with my guest today, Mr. Rick Maher. Hopefully I said that right. Thank you for joining us. This is My Business, Your World with my guest today, Mr. Rick Maher. Rick, thank you for joining us. And we're chatting a little bit, wrapping up. You gave us, told us a little bit about 3 things that drove you to success or to where you are today. And I'd like to pick up on 2 of them. And the reason is not too many people, as you mentioned, take on a business coach or an advisor very early on. And I think that is so important, critical to your business success to kind of be able to navigate some of the uncharted waters or things that are coming. And the other thing you touched on, which is very instrumental, at a conference we just had on Friday, Ron was there, and he was our keynote for the pre-conference dinner that we had, and he talked about the sense, a true sense of entrepreneurship and perseverance, which means you're not afraid to take those risks or afraid to fail. It's very, very critical to business. So let's talk a little bit, elaborate a little bit more, continue, and maybe tell us about some of the clients that you've helped that weren't afraid to take those risks and where they are today.
So, being afraid to fail, I think that as an entrepreneur, I came up with our tagline, solving the HR problems that keep business owners awake at night, because I was awake at night. And I was sitting on the edge of my bed one night and I had my head in my hands, and I turned to my wife, I said, I don't know what the heck we got ourselves into, but I don't know how we're going to get out of it. And, I look back on that night and I can remember it, and it was so critical and key, because it needs to be, if you're going to truly succeed, I believe, you need to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. There's this ledge that we're all kind of always standing on, because to be an entrepreneur, if you're a solopreneur and you're doing your own work and that's what you want it to be, this may not apply as much as someone who wants to build a business. When I was an employee before I started my own business, I only thought about me. So how much vacation time do I have? How much, what time do I get off of work? And when will my commission check come? And all those sorts of things. As the CEO of a company, I'm thinking about cash flow. I'm thinking about strategy. I'm thinking about us and we, whereas the team that's working traditionally for a company is thinking about I or me. So I think that being comfortably uncomfortable is part of that, because in order to grow, you need to get outside that comfort zone and try things that maybe you didn't think about. And that's the ability to not be afraid to fail. You don't want to fail, And when you do fail, you want to fail fast and cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So try things, try them quick, and have a process in place to analyze whether they're working quickly or not. And if they're not working quickly, know when to pull the plug immediately and say, okay, that failed. But where I succeeded in that is I pulled the plug quickly, I see where it went wrong, and how do I change those things. So that ability to say I can fail and I can tell the world that I'm going to fail is an important thing. And I was prior to starting my business, I was very self-introspective, and there's all kinds of assessments online, Myers-Briggs and those sorts of things. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about entrepreneurship to really take one of those assessments, because they will tell you about yourself. And they're an important thing. On the second side, having a business coach, I think that I know what I know what I don't know, but what scares me is what I don't know that I don't know. And having an experienced business coach or team of advisors who have been through those things and who can say, you're going down a path that I went down 20 years ago. You might not want to do it that way. Think about it this way. And that kind of thinking, understanding what you don't know, is the scary part. Have people around that can help you identify those things faster and cheaper than failing or finding them out yourself. So I'll give you for an example. People go down the route, and I went down it, and you get involved in a lawsuit with a partner or an ex-partner. There are things that you don't know, and you find those things out. So now today, I try to help mentor other entrepreneurs or people who are thinking about this. I have an experience that I don't want them to have.
Right.
And if I can help work on that with them and help them avoid those sorts of things, and that's what I got out of my business coach. As far as some of the companies go that we work with and where they are, we've had a bunch that have started with us in the early days when we were first really feeling our way, blindly sometimes, and they understood what we were trying to accomplish. They understood the model. They were entrepreneurs themselves, and they appreciated the effort that we were undertaking and what it could be if it worked very well. So we have several clients that have been with us more than 5 years, really from the very beginning. And they've been a part of our model evolving, and they've been the types of folks that we can go to and say, hey, we have an idea, we'd like to give it a shot, would you help us kind of craft those things? So there have been those great stories. There have been plenty that we've lost because of that, and that's part of it, and not being afraid to fail. But I think the bigger thing is that as we've evolved and our service model has evolved, we've had companies that we've helped being a part of them selling their business, which was a big deal. We've helped them change their business in many ways. They were CEOs that were running around like crazy people all day long, and we've put some process and procedure in place that have helped change the way that they run their business. So it's really run the gamut, and it comes from two of those three critical things: having a business coach or a support system, and the second thing is knowing what you don't know and being uncomfortable, being comfortable without being uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense. All the most successful individuals and organizations, they fail. It's great when you can fail fast, or you're able to go in and pull the plug soon enough. Oftentimes, it's not the case, and that's fine, but out of failure comes success and growth, because now you know how to. And it's important to have the right people around you, whether it's getting a business coach and so on. So it's very critical. I get it. You must, if you're uncomfortable, for example, for me personally, any challenges or setbacks that I think that I have, it's going to be, it's going to be a little tough to trod through, I typically try to go in and become comfortable, relatively speaking, in those tides. So then this way now I understand it and I get it. And again, you get people to come on board who are there to kind of help or give some kind of feedback or something, can tell you about some of the things that are going to go on in that journey or that path, but you get through with that. Now, your family is here on Long Island. Do you have children?
Yes, my entire family is here on Long Island. My wife and I are high school sweethearts and been
Oh, that's
together
sweet.
since, the 7th grade essentially, and we have 3 boys, and we live in Mount Sinai. And first off, through the difficult times, having a wife who there were times when I wanted to quit, when I was like, I'm done, I'm going, and she said, no, you're not. And she kicked me in the tail and said, get out there and do what you're doing because it's the right thing and it's working and you're helping a lot of people. It's not easy, but it's working. So that was most important. But the second thing when I started my business was I have 3 boys, the oldest 15, a 12, and a 10-year-old. I wanted to be there for them. When I was working, one of the catalysts that said, I can't do this anymore, it was my oldest son's 5th birthday, and they said, my job called and said, we need you in California tomorrow. I said, well, it's my son's 5th birthday. And they said, that's great. Tell him happy birthday. We'll see you in California tomorrow. Part of having a business and building it around my lifestyle, the business owner has to have a personal vision. And that personal vision has to tie into their business. So for me, in my case, it's, I start working at 5 in the morning, as my team will attest. But between 5 and 7 p.m., I shut down a little bit so that I can be there for the sports and the homework. Then I'm back to it after the 7 p.m. hour. But so that's part of my personal vision. And what I would suggest that every person who's thinking about entrepreneurship or starting a business, think about what you truly want out of life, and build your business that supports that, because they become intertwined. But what I would caution folks is saying is, if the motivation is I want to make more money and play more golf, let me debunk that myth. There's less golf and less money at times. So the motivation has to be other than just you want more time off and more money.
You have to pay, and I think even the same story you're sharing, a lot of organizations, mid-sized and large ones, you see they're going in and they're doing things that are more flexible to try and accommodate family life and so on, family growth and development, because if your greatest asset or resources is your HR, your human resources, the people who are there that makes your business and make them function, make you make that money and become more profitable, it is absolutely critical that you're able to become flexible. When we come back, we're going to go into another break again. Let's talk a little bit about some of the changes, because HR has gone through some significant changes over the years, and there are a couple other things that are going on, and we can look at it as the landscape here on Long Island as well. Again, this is Dr. Graham, My Business, Your World. You can send us an email at info@Graham Consulting and Research, or telephone 631-481-9124 if you have any questions for us. Thank you. Hello, thank you for joining us again. I am Dr. Graham. I have today, my guest is Mr. Rick Maher, and this is My Business, Your World. If you have any questions, you can send us an email at info@grahamconsultingandresearch.com or 631-481-9124. Rick, we're back again. All right, so we're chatting about some of the challenges that businesses face on Long Island in terms of HR, and some of the things that they're doing to kind of change those to make their employees a little bit more comfortable and happy so that they can produce more, and especially in terms of the family. Their family is priceless and invaluable, and you have to be able to nurture that. You can't have people coming in and not be able to do that. Let's wrap up on that if you have any other takeaways or certain things to share. And then let's talk about the landscape of HR. What's happened, maybe 3 years ago that you've seen since you started. And let's look in terms of, maybe the next 3 to 5 years.
So as far as, let's call it happy employees, one of my inspirations, I'll take it from two perspectives. What we do in our business to share with other entrepreneurs and folks thinking about entrepreneurship, how they can do this, and then what I'm seeing from the world out there and the companies that we're dealing with. So from my perspective, one of the inspirations for me and how we deal with the folks that work with us is a book called The Dream Manager by a gentleman named Michael Kelly. It's a great book. It's a short read, and it's really about driving at what motivates an employee. And by keeping really happy employees, because of what you understand about them, will make them more productive and give them the things that they want out of life. So for instance, as I mentioned in the last segment, this is a lifestyle business that we've built, and it's based on my personal vision, and I do certain things at certain times of the day for certain reasons. One of the things that we did was we wrote what our values were, and they're published, and everyone who works with us knows them. And the first value is family first, and the second one is growth is not an option. We're growing, but family first is important because I want to hear at times from when I'm talking to my team, children crying in the background, the dog barking, or Johnny's sick from school. I want them to be home for them. That's one of the most critical things, and I think the folks that work with us, they understand that's how we operate. However, that doesn't mean that at 7 o'clock when Johnny goes to sleep, you don't come back to work and get your job done, because growth is not an option. So the folks that work with us, one of the first interview questions we ask is, what do you want? And it's never money. It's never the glory of being the hero that saves the day. It's, I want to go home at night, or I want to have the flexibility to do the things that I really want to do, which is, in most cases, take care of my family in some way, shape, manner, or form. So as a business, we really try to focus on that. We understand, and each person who works with us has their own personal vision, so that we can understand it and we manage to that. Mm-hmm. So that's from our perspective, that's been a really important thing, and that includes behavioral assessments and what drives people and all those sorts of things. So I think the really good leadership teams are looking at those things, and it's changed from the industrial age of get in, punch the clock, and work till you die, to, okay, how do we turn this around? How do we use technology? How do we use what I would call the millennial way of doing business, which is thinking about the existential things in life a little bit more than, call it, the industrial age working mentality. So we've really tried to tap into that, and I think it's been a tremendous success for us. Just and the way that I measure that as a leader of an organization is, I look at our retention from our client base, mm-hmm. and I look at the expansion of our client base. If the team is performing at top peak, we're gonna expand what we're doing for each client, and we're gonna retain them longer. The way that they do that is they're fully engaged when they're at work, because they know they have the ability to take care of things at home when necessary. So that's from our side. We've really looked at that, and it's been a very important thing for our business in not only creating a happy team, creating a happy client base, but ultimately what's the real goal is to grow the business, and those are two key components to growing our business. So from the outside world, what we're seeing and dealing with clients, a lot of times, as we talked about in an earlier segment, someone starts a business with their spouse in their basement, then they hire their best friend and friend from high school and blah, blah, blah. And as the business grows and reaches let's call it a critical mass, and they're hiring the outside world and they're developing, they're still operating without consistent policies and procedures. And those inconsistent policies and procedures add to the employee's dissatisfaction and work-life balance. So here's an example. When you start a business and it's your best friend from high school, and they say, look, I want 3 weeks off because we're going to Australia for 3 weeks, and I'm going, okay, see you later. That's okay when it's a small business, as long as it can survive. But as the business gets bigger, and you have some people that are taking 3 weeks off because, hey, I've been with you since day one, and you have other people who only get 1 week's vacation, those inconsistent policies and procedures create a clash in the business, but ultimately it's not getting at what each person needs in their work-life balance, so that they can be the most productive they can. So what we've really focused and what we've really seen with employers that we're working with is they tend to have unhappy employees, when their work life is out of balance, and they have out of balance work life situations because the employer has not set the processes, the tools, the policies, and the procedures that everyone understands clearly where they are in this business, where they fit into what's going on, and ultimately, how are they going to help the business succeed, and tying all those things together. So we've seen a real effort of some of the more progressive employers to say, this is the path that I need to go down, and it leads into the changes in HR. So it's no longer just make sure the company picnic goes off without a hitch. It's how do we take everything we're doing, from performance evaluations to different needs of each employee, and incorporating them into the business synergistically, which will ultimately lead to everyone's happier, clients stay longer, clients buy more, business grows, employees have work-life balance, and it changes really the way the business operates.
I have the opportunity to run a program that's funded by Walmart, GPN Going Places Network. Not sure if you're familiar with it. It's under the Dress for Success program. And I have a number of women who are trying to and looking to re-enter the workforce. And oftentimes, you touched on the hours. There's a certain amount of things that are mandate that you have to go in, and you as the employer and as actually the employee have to understand that in order for the business to grow, you have to put that time in. So it's not a free-for-all. And like you shared, well, you've gone home to take care and so and so. It can't also be habitual where you're making the excuses just because you've allowed that flexibility, or you're being kind and generous to help to build that. Because I'm sure you've experienced it. There are a lot of people who are just slackers, and they actually are more of a burden and a more hindrance to a lot of the HR policies and a lot of the efficiency of organizations. But that you have to go in and you have to be prepared to do that. Some organizations actually try to incorporate and tell you that the families first and so on, they believe it, but they don't see it through. And I kind of like the way you talk about looking at their vision and your vision and marrying it. Do you see that also probably continuing when you become I don't know what size organization in terms of revenue, but let's say a $500,000 $500 million company in the future? Do you see that you will still have or stay true to those visions and values?
The answer is yes and no. So of the 158,000 employers in that target market we described, there are plenty who the answer is no, right? However, there are plenty who the answer is yes. And it's not something that typically the CEO wakes up one day and says, oh, great, everyone's going to go home and take care of their children today. It's not something that works that way. It's got to be part of the business, and it's got to be part of the strategy, and that strategy evolves over time, but it has a long-term goal with lots of tactics underneath that. So I'll give you for an example. In our business, just to make it easy, we've used technology and performance management systems so that employees log what's going on each day. So I can just simply open up a web page and see everything that's happened at any one time and know that the process is working. Now, if there's not information, I know that the process is broken down. That prompts me to inquire. But just today, the use of technology, whether it's CRM systems or performance management systems, HIRS kinds of systems that are out there, many of them are free. And if the business owner uses them as part of their business and the employees use them as part of business, the technology could be a bridge to call it the old world industrial way of looking at employees and the new millennial way of looking at employees.
Okay, very interesting. Now, let's talk about some of the struggles that some of these business owners are actually experiencing, and maybe how they should be probably looking at it or targeting that.
Okay. So from an HR perspective, one of the biggest things we hear every day is, I can't find good people. So let's put this whole ball of wax into the hiring process. And part of that is it goes down to really the core of their business and where they started, right? So they don't have a vision. Many of them do not have a real vision with strategic initiatives that they need to take, things that are 3 years, 4 years and 5 years out. They don't have the tactics written down that need to support those things. What I'm going to do each day to further those goals. And then, more importantly, what they truly want for their business and their employee staff. So I'll give you for an example. So a lot of times someone says, I need a bookkeeper, right? But I also want a bookkeeper who can be the administrative assistant, who can be the salesperson, do marketing, do collections, and make sure the facilities are up and running. And they try to create super person. And in doing so, they just expect that super person is out there, and they've made the job so broad that they can't find the right person. B, when they find them, they so overload them because it's an impossible task, they end up firing them or getting rid of them and saying, I'll just do it myself. And the just do it myself is the biggest mistake I think anyone who wants to be a CEO can make. If you want to just own your job, I want to be an accountant, then I want to just do tax returns and I'm doing it and that's it. Call it solopreneur. You want to be a CEO where you're running an enterprise. I'll just do it myself because I'm the only one who can do it is probably the worst thing that anyone can do. So where does it start? It starts with building proper job descriptions, how they fit into the business and how they fit into the strategic and tactical things. It starts with how you interview. So many times folks interview like this. Corrine, so where'd you go to high school? Oh, that's where you went. Oh, great. Do you know Sally Smith? Sure. Great. Why don't you come here on Monday? I think you got the job. And they don't know how to properly interview. They're focused on the hard skills and who the person is rather than the behaviors and the motivations that drive that person. So typically someone says, they look at a resume and they say the resume is great, you went to this college, so on and so forth, you're hired. But 3 months later, they end up firing that person because they hate them.
Yeah. Let's just go to our final break before we come in, and let's just pick up, because this process I go through also, I see it, and we can talk about it and elaborate a little more. Again, thank you for joining us. Again, this is My Business, Your World. I'm Dr. Graham with my guest, Mr. Rick Maher. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is My Business, Your World. I'm Dr. Graham with my guest today, Mr. Rick Maher. Rick, thank you again for joining us. We're on our last segment. Just have a couple of minutes, and I want to kind of wrap up where we're talking about. But since in our dialogue you were talking about, it feels like we're in the 8th grade where boys on one side and girls on one side. Hey, listen, we can put it, when you get to the 9th grade now, it's HR compliance. Boys on one side, girls on one side, compliance, policies and procedures and all that fun stuff. So let's get back into talking about thinking that they're not finding, where you were sharing with me, not having the right people or overworking one particular employee because the job descriptions are not there or are not laid out.
Yep. So we're finding a whole host of folks that they say they can't find the right people. Where we come back to is they're not asking the right questions. Whether it's in the job ad and how it's written and how the job is defined on key accountabilities, what that job actually does each day, or whether it's in the interview process, focusing on the behaviorals and what motivates people. So we were just chatting quickly, they focus on the resume, what the skill set is, but they end up firing them on the behavior. So our biggest thing is ask behavioral type questions, have a behavioral style of interviewing. But more importantly, one of our recommended best practices is do behavioral analyses or assessments of each employee and understand truly what motivates them, and then more importantly, how it ties into the job that they're being hired to do. So I think that in the marketplace, what we're seeing is there's tons of talent sitting on the sideline. Just like when I started my business in 2008 and all the HR people were sitting on the sideline, it's there to be deployed. It's just the smart CEOs figure out how to ask the right questions, how to dangle the right bait, but more importantly, to understand how each those talents fit into their overall tactical and strategic vision. And that's the real key that we see. It's focused on behaviors.
It's very interesting and it's very important because you can also take that up from when you're interviewing them, also the presentation of whatever resumes that they're providing you, and when you're having that 5-minute 15-minute conversation. Part of our training program, we teach them, you make your first impression 7 seconds. If you're giving it 15 seconds or 30 seconds to make an elevator pitch, guess what? You've already used up that time in terms of that first impression that's made, and you have to come across as if you know, and you must be able to make those behavioral assessments very early on. They too themselves as employees have to be able to understand while they're looking for a job because there's a need, it also there also has to be that right fit. Now, I know that there are a tremendous amount of job opportunities. They're not all paying, which is what a lot of individuals want, the salaries that they were getting before. But I think it allows, and this is also where HR has also played an intricate role, is it now allows you to be flexible to take on multiple career paths.
Yeah, and we're seeing, call it the CFO of a large corporation from 10 years ago that was working in the city and making a certain salary. Well, in the small family business, first or second generation family business, it might not be the same kind of CFO's role that they traditionally worked in their old world, but it might be a new CFO's world where they're touching on new skill sets, new opportunities, and identifying those in the interview process, and then more importantly, describing how you're going to apply those to the new job. It's a tremendous opportunity for those that get out of that world that they lived in, because that world is, for many people, has gone. So how do you adapt and overcome what the challenges are in the marketplace?
Okay. Well, we're almost up on, I think, the last minute or two of this program. Thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure, hopefully, in the future, we'll invite you back, and hopefully you'll be able to join us. Now, any takeaways that you want to share as an employer yourself and a company that provides services to other organizations for potential individuals re-entering the workforce? What should they be looking out for the companies that they're looking to work for, or how do they prepare themselves to be able to be more marketable to what the current market landscape, especially for Long Island?
I think that the focus on the behavior and less on the skill. So it's less about, I was an accountant that went to this school and did these things. It's more about, how do I add value to the business, and how do I deal with situations where maybe in a small business the cash flow is tight? How do you react in those kinds of situations? I'd be prepared to describe those and how ultimately they can fit into the tactics and strategy of the business.
All right. Thank you again. It was a pleasure. Again, this is My Business, Your World. I'm your host, Dr. Graham, with my guest, Mr. Rick Maher. If you have any questions for us, you can send us an email at info@grahamconsultingandresearch.com. The telephone number is 631-481-9124. Thank you for joining us.